first time I played the tape for someone else. The voice on it said something different than what I'd heard alone. That's the part I need to start with, because that's the part that made me understand the tape wasn't a recording. It was a conversation I'd been having for 26 years without knowing the other side could hear me. My name is Nora Vargas. I'm 34. I teach high school biology in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I am telling you this because last Tuesday, my husband Marco played the tape while I was at work, and now he won't look at me the same way. And I need someone to understand what happened before I decide whether to explain it to him or let him keep the version he already has. Because both options end something, and I cannot tell which ending is worse. The tape is a Maxell UR90, beige shell, in a handwritten label in my mother's writing that says, Nora, Cumpleaños Cinco. It's a recording of my 5th birthday party at our apartment in El Paso, February 1997. 20 minutes of party sounds, my cousins singing, my mother's voice directing traffic in 2 languages, my father briefly audible asking where the lighter for the candles went. Normal, happy, complete. Except for the woman. Between minute 11 and minute 12, during a gap where someone apparently stopped the boombox that had been playing Selena, a woman's voice says, clearly and without distortion, the blue house on Solano will have a leak behind the water heater. Tell your mother to check before she signs. We moved into a blue house on Solano Drive in Las Cruces when I was 7. The water heater had a slow leak behind the unit that damaged the subfloor, and my mother discovered it after we'd already signed the lease, and the repair came out of my parents' deposit when we moved out 2 years later. It cost them $1,100 they didn't have. It was one of the reasons we moved again. I didn't hear the voice until I was 8. My mother had packed the tape in a box of my baby things that traveled with us from El Paso to Las Cruces, to the duplex on Pinon Street, to the rental in Mesilla. I found it while looking for something else. Played it on the boombox in my room and heard the birthday party and then the woman, and I thought she was a guest I didn't remember. I didn't think about the content of what she said because I was 8 and the words didn't connect to anything I was tracking. I just liked hearing the party. I liked hearing my father, because I played the tape maybe 50 times between the ages of 8 and 11. I know this because I was a specific child. I kept lists, I kept counts, I kept a journal. There was more ledger than diary. 50 plays. And on every one of those plays, the woman said the same thing, the exact sentence about Solano Drive, until the 51st play, when I was 11 and we had just moved from the Pinon duplex to Mesilla, and the woman said something new. The house on Calle de Paz has a good roof, but the landlord will sell it in April. You'll have 14 months. It's enough. The landlord sold the house on Calle de Paz the following April. We had 14 months. We moved to the apartment on Treves, which is where I lived through middle school, and the woman, when I played the tape again in the Treves apartment, said, Treves is safe. Work, you can stop checking for a while. I stopped playing the tape. Not deliberately. I just stopped. The way you stop any habit that feels completed. I put the tape back in the box. I didn't think about it through most of high school. When I did think about it, I thought about it the way you think about something you experienced as a child that you've since reclassified. I assumed I'd been half asleep, or that I'd conflated the tape with something I'd overheard my parents discussing, or that the specificity was something my memory had backfilled after the events occurred. I was a science track kid by then. I had explanations. The explanations worked. I went to NMSU. I got my teaching certificate. I met Marco in a genetics elective. I took a job at Las Cruces High. So I moved into Marco's apartment on Espina Street, and then we moved together into the house on Locust, which is where we live now. And I unpacked the box of baby things into the closet of the room we were vaguely calling the office. And I didn't play the tape, and I didn't think about the tape. And 6 years passed. Then, in November of last year, my mother had a stroke. She survived. She's in a care facility in El Paso. She has partial left side mobility and full cognition, and she is angry and bored and difficult in the way she has always been angry and bored and difficult, which the neurologist says is actually a positive indicator. I drive to El Paso every other weekend. It's 45 minutes on E10. It's not far enough to be a hardship and not close enough to be casual. Oh, and every trip leaves me scraped out in a way I don't fully show Marco because the scraping isn't about the stroke. It's about the distance between who my mother is and who I spent my childhood needing her to be, which is a distance the stroke didn't create but made impossible to keep ignoring. In December, going through my mother's apartment to find her insurance paperwork, I found a second tape. Same brand, same era. Maxell UR90, beige shell. The label said para cuando pregunte, which means for when she asks. My mother's handwriting. I took it home. I played it in the tape deck I'd bought at Goodwill the previous year because Marco and I had been on a brief, self-conscious analog kick that produced a turntable, a tape deck, and 2 months of pretending we preferred them before going back to Spotify. The tape was my mother's voice. Just hers, recorded in what sounded like a car, engine noise in the background, the particular acoustic flatness of someone speaking into a handheld recorder while driving. She was speaking to me. She was speaking to the version of me who would someday find this tape. And she was explaining something, and the explanation was this. The woman on my birthday tape was not a guest. The woman was not on the original recording. My mother had played that tape dozens of times in the years before I found it, and the woman was never there. The voice appeared only after I began listening. It was keyed to me, not to the tape, not to the recording, not to the birthday party, to me. My mother discovered this because she played the tape one afternoon when I was at school. I would have been 9. And the woman's voice was not there. Just the party. Just the singing. She rewound it, played it again, and it was just the party. She put the tape back. That evening she watched me take it out and play it, and she stood outside my bedroom door and heard the party and then heard the woman say something she couldn't quite make out through the door. She asked me what I was listening to. I said my birthday tape. She asked if anything was different about it. I said no. She let it go. She tested it 3 more times over the next year. Every time she played the tape alone, just the party. Every time I played the tape, the woman. She tried playing it with me in the room. The woman spoke, but said something different than what she'd said when I was alone. When my mother was present, the woman's advice was vague. General. The kind of thing you could dismiss. When I was alone with the tape, the woman was specific. Addresses, timelines, structural details about houses I hadn't lived in yet. My mother's tape, the Para Cuando Pregunt tape, was 41 minutes long. Most of it was practical. She described the tests she'd run. She described taking the tape to the church and playing it for Father Munoz, who heard only the party. She described playing it on 3 different tape decks and 2 boom boxes. Same results. She described taking the tape to a curandero in Juarez, who listened to 30 seconds and handed it back, and told her the voice was not on the tape. She asked him where the voice was. He said, "In the space between your daughter and any surface that can hold sound." And then, at minute 34, My mother said something that I've listened to 11 times now, and each time it produces the same physical response. A tightening across my ribs that is not pain and is not fear, but is something for which I don't have a word in either language. She said, "The woman has never been wrong. Every house, every timeline, every warning, all correct. I verified them all. And I stopped being afraid of her around the time we moved to Trivis, because fear is not sustainable when the thing you are afraid of keeps saving your family money and trouble. But Nora, I need you to hear me. The reason I made this tape. The woman is not predicting where you will live. I tested this too. In 2005, I was looking at 2 apartments, one on Telshore, one on Montana. I liked Telshore. The price was better. The neighborhood was better. I played your birthday tape alone, heard nothing. I brought you to the Telshore apartment for a showing and played the tape in the car on the way there, with you in the backseat reading and not paying attention. The woman said, "Montana's where you need to be. The Telshore unit has mold in the shared duct." We took Montana. I called about Telshore a year later. The building had a mold remediation, 3 units, including the one I'd wanted. My mother paused on the recording. I could hear her breathing in the road. She's not predicting, Nora. She's choosing. She is moving you. She has been moving you since you were 5 years old, and every place she's put you has been the right place. And I cannot make myself be afraid of that. But you should know. Someone should tell you that the path you think you walked, you were walked. I sat in the office of our house on Locust Street and I listened to that. And then I listened to it again. And the Goodwill tape deck was on the desk in front of me. And my birthday tape was in the box in the closet 6 feet away. And I did not play it. I put my mother's tape in my bag. And I drove to school and I taught cellular respiration to 31 sophomores who didn't care. And I drove home and I didn't play the birthday tape. I didn't play it because I was afraid of what I'd hear, and I didn't play it because I was not sure I was afraid of what I'd hear, and the space between those 2 feelings was where I lived for the next 3 months. Here's what happened during those 3 months. In January, Marco and I started talking seriously about buying a house. Renting on Locust was fine, but we were both 34, both employed, both carrying the quiet, low-grade anxiety of people who have been stable long enough to distrust stability. We talked to a lender. We got pre-approved. We started looking. Marco liked a place on Spruce. I liked a place on Del Rey. We looked at 9 houses in 6 weeks and couldn't agree. And the disagreement was friendly and ordinary, and Marco never once suspected that my inability to commit to a house had anything to do with anything other than the normal difficulty of choosing where to live. But it did. It had to do with the tape in the closet. It had to do with the fact that every house I'd ever lived in had been chosen, not by my mother's judgment and not by economic circumstance, and not by the organic drift of a working-class family across the rental landscape of southern New Mexico, but by a voice on a cassette that only spoke to me and only spoke the truth and had been steering my physical location through the world since I was 5 years old. And it had to do with a question I couldn't stop asking, which was, if I played the tape now, would the woman tell me which house to buy? And if she did, would I be able to refuse? Not because the advice would be wrong, because in 26 years, the advice had never been wrong, but because following it would mean that this choice, the first house I'd own, the place where Marco and I would build whatever we were building, wasn't mine, had never been mine. That every address in my life was a coordinate in someone else's navigation, and I had been a passenger in a journey I'd experienced as walking. I didn't play the tape. I want you to understand that. I held the line for 3 months. I looked at houses with Marco using only the information available to any person buying a house. Inspection reports, neighborhood data, even commute times. The feeling of standing in a kitchen and knowing whether you could cook in it. I was doing it right. I was choosing freely for the first time in my life, even if the freedom was invisible to everyone but me. And then last Tuesday, Marco played the tape. He didn't know about any of it. He was home early, I was at school, and he was cleaning out the office closet because we'd agreed to start packing for whichever house we chose. And he found the box of baby things, and he found the tape, and he put it in the tape deck that was still on the desk because I'd never moved it, and he pressed play. He told me this when I got home. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the tape in front of him, and his face was the face of a person who has received information they cannot integrate. And he said, "Who is the woman on your birthday tape?" I asked him what he heard. He said he heard a party. He heard singing. He heard a man asking about a lighter. And then he heard a woman say, and he told me the exact words, and I'm writing them exactly as he said them to me. The house on Rinconada. The foundation is sound. Marco will want the one on Spruce, but Rinconada is where you raise the child. You need to be there by August. We hadn't looked at a house on Rinconada. I didn't know there was a house for sale on Rinconada. I checked that night on my phone in the bathroom with the door closed. There is. 3-bedroom, 1,400 square feet, listed 6 days before Marco played the tape. The price is inside our approval. The lot backs up to an acequia. The photos show a kitchen where I could cook. I am not pregnant. We are not trying. We have talked about it in the way that 34-year-olds who are buying their first house talk about it, theoretically, cautiously, with the understanding that the conversation is approaching, but has not yet arrived. The woman said, "The child," not a child. The child. As though it were settled, as though it were already a coordinate. Marco has not asked me again about the voice. He's been quiet in a way that is not angry and not frightened, but is something else. Recalibrated. He looks at me differently. Not with suspicion. With a kind of revised attention, as if he's reviewing everything he knows about me against a new variable he can't name. He has not mentioned Spruce Street since Tuesday. He has not mentioned any house since Tuesday. He goes to work, he comes home. He's gentle and careful, and he is waiting for me to explain something, and I am sitting inside the explanation, and I cannot find a version of it that doesn't end with him looking at me the way you look at a person whose life has been narrated by something you can't see. Here's what I haven't told you yet. After Marco went to bed on Tuesday night, I went to the office and I opened the tape deck and I looked at the tape. The Maxell UR90 with my mother's handwriting. The beige shell. The tape had been rewound to the beginning. Marco said he'd played it once, listened to the whole thing, and stopped. He did not say he rewound it. The deck doesn't auto-reverse. Someone rewound the tape after Marco pressed stop. I put on headphones. I pressed play. I heard the party. I heard my cousins. I heard my father ask about the lighter. And at minute 11, in the gap where Selena stopped, the woman spoke. She didn't say anything about a house. She didn't mention Rinconada or foundations or August or a child. What she said was, "He heard me, Nora. That's new. That hasn't happened before." And then after a pause, long enough that I thought the message was over. I don't know what it means when they can hear me too. I've only ever spoken to you. I need to think about this. Don't play the tape again until I tell you it's safe. I'm not sure it's safe. The woman, the voice that has never been wrong, that has protected my family across 6 moves and 26 years, that chose every home I've ever slept in, that speaks from inside a recording of a birthday party that happened before I could form permanent memories. The woman sounded afraid. Itzhak, I have not played the tape again. It has been 6 days. The tape is in the glove compartment of my car. The tape deck is unplugged in the office. Marco and I have eaten dinner together every night and talked about work and his mother's knee replacement and whether to repaint the bathroom, and neither of us has mentioned the tape or the voice or Rinconada or the child. But yesterday morning I drove past Rinconada on my way to school. I didn't plan to. My route doesn't go that way. I took the turn because my hands took the turn, and I slowed down without deciding to slow down. And the house was there on the left. 3 bedrooms, a century plant in the front yard, a for sale sign that was slightly crooked, and the front door was blue. Not painted recently. Old blue, were faded and specific, and exactly the blue of the house on Solano Drive in 1999. The house where the first prediction came true. The house where it started. I parked across the street. I didn't get out. I sat in my car with the engine running and the tape in the glove compartment 18 inches from my right knee. And I looked at the house. And the house looked like a house. It looked like a kitchen I could cook in. It looked like a yard where a child could stand in the acequia water in August and scream with joy the way I screamed in the sprinklers on Solano Drive when I was 7. The rational part of me, the part that teaches biology, that trusts methodology, that built a life on the premise that observable, reproducible phenomena are the only phenomena worth organizing your decisions around. That part says, do not buy this house. Nurk, do not follow a voice you cannot explain to a destination you did not choose. Tell Marco the truth and let him help you find a therapist and buy the house on Spruce because you picked it together using real information, and that is what free people do. But the other part, the part that grew up in every house the woman chose and was safe in every one, the part that knows the voice has never been wrong, the part that heard the woman sound afraid for the first time in 26 years and understood with a certainty that sits below language that the fear was not about me. The fear was about Marco, about what it means that someone else can hear her now, about what happens when the voice that moves you is no longer a private navigation, but a shared one. The woman wasn't afraid of being discovered. She was afraid that she had expanded, that speaking to Marco was not something she chose to do, that it happened because I brought him close enough, that the field or the frequency or whatever she is had bled past the boundary of me and into the person sleeping next to me, and she did not know what she becomes when she's in 2 people instead of 1. I have a husband who's waiting for an explanation. I have a tape that told me not to play it. I have a house on Rinconada that I drove past again this morning and will drive past again tomorrow. I have a woman's voice that has been the most reliable thing in my life. More reliable than either parent, more reliable than my own judgment. And she told me to stop. And stopping is the one thing she has never asked me to do before. Marco wants to go see the house on Spruce this weekend. He brought it up tonight, casually, testing. If I say yes, we will see Spruce and probably make an offer and move into a house that I chose freely and that the woman did not choose for me, and I will never know if Rinconada was where the child was supposed to be, and I will live in that not knowing the way my mother lived inside the knowledge, quietly, with a tape in a drawer, making a recording for the day someone asks. If I say no, if I say let's look at Rinconada instead, then Marco will ask why, and I will have to tell him about the voice. or I will have to lie, and either way the house will not be something we chose together. It will be something I followed him into, something I was walked to, and he'll be walked to now whether he knows it or not because he heard her, and I don't know what hearing her does, and neither does she. It's Thursday night. Marco is asleep. The tape is in the glove compartment and the car is in the driveway, and the driveway is 40 feet from the bedroom where my husband is breathing in the slow, deep rhythm of a person who trusts the house he's sleeping in. I keep thinking about what the curandero told my mother, that the voice is not on the tape, that the voice is in the space between me and any surface that can hold sound. Marco is a surface that can hold sound. Every night I fall asleep next to a surface that can hold sound, and the woman is in the space between us, and she is afraid, and she told me to wait. And I am waiting. And while I wait, the house on Rinconada is sitting half a mile south of here with a blue door that matches a house from 1999 and a yard that fits a child I haven't conceived. I haven't played the tape, I promised. But I need to tell you what happened this morning, the thing that made me sit down and write this, the reason I can't wait for the woman to tell me it's safe. I was brushing my teeth. Marco was in the shower. The bathroom was full of steam and the fan was off because the fan is loud, and we'd been talking through the door. Ordinary morning conversation, and he turned the water off and the pipes went quiet. And in the silence between the water stopping and the curtain pulling back, I heard her. Not from a tape, not from a speaker, not from any device in the house. From the steam, from the water on the mirror, from the condensation on the tile, from every surface in the bathroom that was wet enough to hold a vibration. She said, "Rinconada, August. It has to be August. I'm running out of surfaces. Achi Nora." Marco pulled back the curtain. He looked at me. He said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No." He stood there, dripping, looking at the mirror where my reflection was looking back at me, and he said, "I've been hearing something at night when you're asleep. I thought it was the pipes." I said it was probably the pipes. He looked at me the way he's been looking at me all week, revised, recalibrated. Then he said, "It knows my name. I went to school. I taught biology. I drove past Rinconada. The for sale sign was still there, but the blue door was open, not wide open, 6 inches. The way a door sits when someone has just walked inside and hasn't closed it behind them yet. And standing in the hallway, visible through the gap, was nothing. An empty hallway, a house with no one in it. But the hallway light was on.